The Republican gubernatorial primary race is heating up in Florida, where Florida Attorney General Bill McCollum, a former 10-term congressman, is facing political newcomer and millionaire Rick Scott. Earlier, I had a chance to sit down and speak with Florida Attorney General Bill McCollum about the race and about the issues affecting his state and the nation during a recent campaign stop in West Palm Beach, Florida. Well, Mr. Attorney General, you're facing a tough primary race with polls showing Rick Scott surging. He's outspent you 4-1. Moving forward, what is your strategy to win?
Well, the strategy to win is to express to the people of Florida what this race is really all about. Make sure everybody who's voting knows who I am. I'm somebody who has a record of being a Ronald Reagan conservative. I know they're angry right now about people who say one thing when they're running for office and then do something else. I have a track record you can look at. I don't do that. I'm going to do what I say. I'm running as a conservative, and I'm going to govern as a conservative. And I want people to know that. And we've got a message to deliver. We have enough money to do that. We have a tremendous grassroots campaign. And we have an opponent who's flawed, who was the CEO of Columbia HC at the time of the largest Medicare fraud scandal in history, where they were fined criminally $1.7 billion. He was fired by the board, took away $300 million in stock options, and is now wanting to be governor of the state of Florida. Either as an unindicted co-conspirator in that, or he was an incompetent chief executive of this large company, and I don't see, when the voters contrast us, that they're going to pick that person to be governor. I think they're going to pick me to be governor of the state of Florida.
Now, the campaign is getting very tough. Can you explain to us in a very simple way what Rick Scott did as HCA's former CEO and why that makes him ineligible to be governor of the state of Florida?
Well, when he was Columbia's HCO, he was involved in running the company, and one morning, 33, I believe I'm right, over 30 of his hospitals were raided by the FBI. He was a target, though he never was indicted or tried criminally. The company ripped off the taxpayers. The company as a whole, the hospitals involved massively around the country, were upcoding, trying to get more money out of Medicare, which is, of course, the taxpayer money, and charging more than actually was real. And then they also were not seeing people. 20% of the fines were for turning people away illegally from emergency rooms. What Mr. Scott appears to have been trying to do, and I don't know him personally, from what I read and hear, he was trying to make a buck. He was putting profits over principle and forcing things in these mergers and acquisitions for them to cut and make money, and in this case, cheat the government. Now he's running for governor, and he's using those ill-gotten gains or the proceeds that he got to be built on from those stock options and some cash from the company to run this campaign and to buy the office of governor. I don't think people in Florida are going to allow that to happen. And even though I don't have as much money to spend, I'm not wealthy like he is, I can't fly around in an $8.5 million plane, I do have a message to deliver, and I have a track record that people will and can understand as a conservative, who will govern as a conservative, who will lead this state to create more jobs and do many other things we need to do for Florida.
Now, recently you won a victory when a judge threw out Rick Scott's lawsuit against you. He was attempting to block your access to public matching funds if a rival exceeds campaign spending limits. So now you're eligible for up to $6 million. How is that going to impact your campaign?
Well, we don't know yet that we're going to receive money, because I'm sure that's going to be appealed. I certainly hope that we get matching money, because the reality is that when somebody's willing to put in over $25 million of their own money, their spouse puts into a separate organization that can campaign for you over $10 million, and I presume he's going to put a lot more in. Those of us who are raising $500 checks principally and then are disadvantaged. And I've turned to an outside group to help them raise some money that may help us in the campaign a little bit, but it's just very difficult to do. So I think that it is important that we remember, when we talk about public financing, that while it might be desirable not to have it, you also have to have some way for the candidates who don't have wealth to raise the money. With the limits we've got in Florida, you can't have it both ways. You've got to either have some public financing and abide by the rules that Mr. Scott chose not to do, which he knew at the time he entered were the rules, or you're going to have a case where the public is not served and the other candidates extremely disadvantaged.
On what issues do you and your opponent differ?
Well, we differ in a number of issue areas. One of them is that I believe that we ought to have a timeout of 2 years, a moratorium on local tax increases when I become governor. I'm going to ask the legislature to do that. The reason for that is simple. We in the state are now suffering the greatest economic stress that we've had since the Great Depression. We have double-digit unemployment in the state of 18 million people, the fourth largest in the union. We need to get our economy moving. We need to get small businesses to be able to create jobs, and that means lowering taxes, which I've got a plan to create 500,000 new jobs. This can be found on my website at billmccallum.com. It's something I've worked with Steve Forbes to do. And it means lowering taxes, it means common sense regulations, it means dramatically improving the public education system, it means, doing litigation reform, but it also means that both the state and the local governments have got to take in their belts and set priorities and reduce their spending. And the property values locally have gone down, so the temptation is to raise those taxes, and I don't propose this permanently, but I think for the next 2 years we ought to do that, and then we ought to freeze it, and then we ought to work out a spending program that will say spending won't grow greater than income grows in our state, and some formula that for local property taxes. Mr. Scott opposes that, he says.
You touched upon jobs, which is a really big issue right now for many Floridians. Unemployment rates are pretty high. Elaborate a little bit more on your blueprint to create jobs for Floridians.
Well, the first thing we do to create jobs is to reduce the corporate income tax from 5.5% to 4.5%. We have a proposal for a 10-year exemption from corporate income taxes for certain high-tech, biotech, aerospace industries that agree to move their headquarters to Florida, move production facilities here, meet other qualifications that will give us those headquarters we need in order to be more competitive and create jobs besides those in travel and tourism and agriculture, which are our anchor economic bases at the present time. I also, in this proposal, would suggest a permanent sales tax exemption for certain high-tech equipment needed for industries like biotech and high-tech and aerospace, and building out the internet into the rural areas. And then removing a lot of the red tape and obstacles in Florida regulations. We're not California, New York, or New Jersey, but we're one of the most overregulated states in the country. And if you combine those changes alone, they'll produce, according to the models we've run, 500,000 new jobs over the next 6 years. And in addition to that, which we haven't run in the model, we need to work on capital formation. I have a Genesis Fund proposal, a council on helping local businesses and universities and research centers get the venture capital they need, the early stage that we have so much trouble getting in Florida, and helping reach out to recruit these businesses and help them grow the small businesses that we have around our universities in particular.
Florida's tourism and fishing industries have taken a hit in recent weeks as a consequence of that BP oil spill. What is your take on the federal government's response, BP's response, and what role are you playing?
Well, I'm playing a fairly significant role in my office as Attorney General. My take, and mainly in the claims area to start with, and then it's branched out to other things. This administration did not get off the dime the right way. It was really slow to respond. People in the Panhandle, particularly in Florida, have been extremely adversely affected. Even where the oil has come up in limited quantities, the tourism industry has suffered, and so does everybody. And this is what it's built on out there. And this is the height of their tourist season in the summer. So what I've seen since I've been there is, after many, many weeks of tens of thousands of barrels of oil flowing, they appear to have capped the well finally. But we have a huge amount of oil in the water and on the surface that's sometime going to come to shore somewhere. A lot of it is. And it could come in a hurricane or a storm that moves it. And I don't think still the federal government and the BP folks are as prepared to deal with this as they should. They haven't indicated any willingness to deploy additional microbes that Florida companies produce that would eat the oil. They have not chosen new technologies that are out there, that are available, that would help us to mitigate when the oil does come towards the shore, to sop it up, in addition to skimming vessels. And they've been very slow to put anybody with any authority in Florida to do things, to make decisions. So my office is very involved with pointing all these things out, but we're also involved in the claims process, in people who've been hurt and injured, being able to figure out how to get their claims. Most recently, I've asked BP and now the escrow account that Mr. Feinberg's administering to provide resources to the Florida Bar to give to legal services and legal aid to help people document their claims. They're not getting those claims paid fast enough, largely because they don't know how to take care of the documentation to make the claim. And lots of people have been damaged. So that's what my office is involved with.
The Obama administration is suing the state of Arizona over its immigration law. And this week you announced that Florida is joining Michigan and 7 other states and an amicus brief in support of the Arizona immigration law. Why is this so important, and do you believe that the Obama administration has overstepped its bounds?
Well, first of all, I want to set the record straight because my opponent has made a lot of allegations that aren't true, and I strongly support the Arizona immigration law. Now, having said that, I joined Michigan as the lead in providing an amicus curiae brief saying that the Arizona law is constitutional. And what's the argument here? Very similar to the health care lawsuit where our state has taken the lead, and now with 19 other states and the National Federation of Independent Business, to have the big health care bill declared unconstitutional. We're talking here about states' rights versus the federal government. The enumerated powers in the Constitution that are laid out and very clearly do not give the federal government the power inherent in policing, in this case, in Arizona's case, in areas of requiring people to buy a product like an insurance contract in the case of the health care legislation. The suit in Arizona is real simple. The case is, does the state of Arizona or the state of Florida, the state of Michigan, have inherent police powers, which I think they do, to be able to enforce state and federal laws? And I think they have those powers, and the administration, Obama administration, is arguing they don't. In the case of health care, of course, I mentioned what that is, and between the two of them, they're going to be two of the most significant cases to go to the United States Supreme Court on the division between state and federal power and individual liberty that we've had in my lifetime.
Would you like to see similar legislation in Florida?
I would like to see similar legislation in Arizona. I will say this too, Mr. Scott, my opponent's run an ad which is very misleading, and in that ad also wrong, and where he says when he's governor, he's going to enact a law in Florida that will allow police, when they make an arrest, to check to see if somebody's illegal. They already have that authority today. And Mr. Scott should have known that before he put that ad up and put $5 million behind it. It's a fact, though, that Arizona's law does require and mandate that when somebody's arrested that the police make the check. They darn well ought to be making the check. And I do, and am working with, do support that. I'm working with a legislator here in Florida who's a chairman of a key committee to draft law for the next session of the legislature that will take some key elements like that from the Arizona law and make it part of Florida law.
Now, we talked about the health care lawsuit. Update us, if you will, on where things stand with that right now.
Well, as I mentioned, the health care lawsuit involves involves two things. I mentioned the individual mandate. We filed this lawsuit to declare the big Obama health care bill unconstitutional about 7 minutes after he signed it. And it progressed to get a number of parties there. There are now 20 of us, 19 states joined Florida, plus the National Federation of Independent Business. A motion to dismiss has been filed by the Justice Department. That motion to dismiss, we'll file pleadings on in August, and then in September they'll have a hearing. I believe we'll win that hearing with the judge. I'm hoping he makes a decision before the end of the year. It's not a complicated case. And then I'd like to see it fast-tracked to the United States Supreme Court. My guess is it'll go to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and it'll take a couple of years, but it will go to the Supreme Court. And the probability are it's going to be a 5-4 decision, because those of us who believe, like I do, that the Constitution is to be interpreted as the Founding Fathers intended are really on one side of this, and then the Supreme Court justices and others who, some of them, who believe that it's a living document and think the Commerce Clause covers everything, are on the other side. I think we're going to win, but I think it'll be a very close case, and it'll take a couple of years to get there.
All right, last question, Mr. Attorney General. You've referred to yourself as a Ronald Reagan Republican.
Right.
Talk to us about what being a Ronald Reagan Republican means to you.
Well, it means less government, more individual freedom, strong national defense. It means the rights of our citizens being protected under the Constitution and interpreting the Constitution, as I mentioned a moment ago, as the Founding Fathers intended, appointing judges that will do that, running government from the standpoint of lowering taxes and stimulating the free market system to create jobs. You want to take the burdens off. Jobs come from small business, but jobs aren't created by government, but government can hinder them. So right now, President Obama should be doing exactly what I campaigned for with Ronald Reagan several years ago, instead of what he's doing, because he's more interested, it seems to me, in growing government than growing jobs. And he should be advocating reducing the size and scope of the federal government, cutting, not increasing, the capital gains tax, cutting the corporate tax so we can increase the export market for our products in this country and manufacturing, and reducing the regulatory burden on small businesses and eliminating the unfunded mandates on state and local governments. That is right out of the Ronald Reagan playbook. That is Bill McCollum's playbook, and that is what we should be doing today. And to the degree I can apply that principle and those principles as governor of Florida, we're going to do it, and we're going to grow jobs in Florida despite what Obama's doing elsewhere, because we're going to create the climate to lure businesses here by changing our tax laws the right way, and that will create, by the way, more revenue. It will allow us to build infrastructure. We'll have private-public partnerships. We'll provide incentives for those who want to come in here and invest for 20 and 30 years. And we'll get capital here and make things move. And that's why I say I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican. I believe that's the way you get the economy going. And I'm also a social conservative, which Ronald Reagan was. I'm a values conservative.
All right, Florida Attorney General Bill McCollum, thanks so much for joining us here on Newsmax TV, and good luck with the campaign.
Thank you.